Obviously, we go through what's happened over the course of the past year to bring people up to date, explain issues, and then you talk about what they have to expect will transpire over the next several weeks and months, and that, in this case, is the negotiation of a new CBA. So while we never get into the specifics of internal player meetings, some of you may have heard me say this before, but what transpires in internal player meetings as far as staff is concerned is confidential. Players have a right to that, and I've always operated that way for a very long time. But in a general sense, obviously we'll be spending a lot of time in these meetings talking about the process and the substance of the impending CBA negotiations. I'm looking forward to a good meeting. I expect a pretty packed 2 days. With some amount of luck, we'll be over middle of the day on Wednesday. I hope it doesn't drag too long, although you can never tell. Get a meeting together with a whole bunch of people, and sometimes things take a lot less time than you anticipate, and sometimes they take a lot more, so we'll wait and see. Okay. If you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. If not, I'll go back and go to work.
Don, are you pleased with the turnout that you guys have got here?
Well, I expect to be. You know, we're looking for somewhere between 40 and 60 players, and I think we'll be well within the middle range of that group. We'd always like to have more rather than fewer, but we're far above critical mass, so it'll be great.
Every single member counts and is important, but you've got some pretty big names that are here. We saw, for example, Alexander mentioned. Does that kind of send a message that the guys are taking this very seriously, the whole process of these meetings?
I don't know whether that particularly sends a message that they are, but it's absolutely clear to me that they are. And this is true from the youngest player that just got here and sort of looking around trying to figure out if he belongs, and some of the biggest stars that we've got. And you'll have a bunch of players of varying levels of celebrity, if I can put it that way, that'll be here this week. And there'll be all kinds of players coming to the bargaining meetings once they start and attending the regional meetings we have scheduled in August and so on. I expect very wide participation from all parts of the nation.
At the draft in Pittsburgh, there's just kind of a sense that the Fehr account players need to work with that. Is that premature? And what are your thoughts on it?
Look, none of that is coming from our side. That's the first thing. Secondly, we have not made a proposal, and we haven't heard an owner's proposal. So unless somebody on the other side, on the owner's side, knows something which makes that likely, I can't explain.
After accepting, I guess, the salary cap, were the players fairly pleased with this last deal? What if it was reading as is? What's their overwhelming sense of the current deal?
I think that there are a lot of things they'd like to see differently in the current deal, and obviously we're going to be negotiating a new one because the owners chose to terminate the agreement. If they hadn't, it would have rolled over for another period of time. And we'll have to see. When it comes to the ultimate, obviously you want to end up with an agreement that all the players can be satisfied with and feel is an appropriate one and a fair and equitable one. And as I said before, I mean, it obviously from our standpoint, the starting place is that the players made enormous concessions last time around. The second item that comes to mind is that the game generates a lot more revenue than it did before. When you put those two things together, it ought to point you in a direction as to where this negotiation should go. But I won't have any further comment about that, at least until after this meeting.
So is that to suggest perhaps that, the blueprint is there, that there's
I'm not going to make any further comment about it than that.
Well, there's been some reports that talks will start maybe later this week. July 1st is coming. Is that
they're going to start very quickly after the end of our meeting on Wednesday, and we'll probably make an announcement on that by the time the meeting is over. We want to make sure players are expected first.
In your experience, can something like this, I mean, it's obviously, I know negotiating a CBA can be very long and complicated, but do you think that something like this can be done fairly quickly as well? It's just a question of where everybody's coming from?
Depends on the attitude of the parties. It depends on how many moving pieces you have, and it depends on whether you have large-scale or small-scale disputes. And what I mean by that is a small-scale dispute is you have some things you disagree with, perhaps with very strong feelings on both sides, but it's not an issue that anybody's likely to be willing to shut down the industry over, as distinct from the large-scale disputes, which is what has caused the lockouts in all of the salary cap sports over the last 15 or 16 years. And the owners come in and they say, we have a cap, which is an artificial limit on payment of aggregate salaries well below market value. That's why they want the cap. And that's not in dispute. And then they want to push it lower. So the only way I can answer it is we'll have to wait and see what happens. I'm not going to prejudge it, but there's plenty of time to negotiate an agreement between now and September 15th. And by the way, there's nothing magic about September 15th. The law is that if you don't have a new agreement, and as long as both sides are willing to keep negotiating, you continue to play under the terms of the old one until you reach an agreement.
You think it's possible
What's possible?
to play after September 15th?
I don't make any comment here. All I know is that in baseball there were any number of occasions in which we played while the parties were continuing to negotiate.
Don, all your experience in baseball is in an industry without a cap. How is this going to be different for you?
Well, in that regard, I don't think it'll be much different. Obviously, we had negotiations about caps in baseball. That's what produced the 9-foot strike. But it's a system of player compensation and you weave revenue sharing into it. So it's not a process which is intellectually, conceptually difficult to capture.
There's a player negotiating committee of approximately 30 players?
We haven't announced it yet, but there's a bunch of players on it now. It'll be announced at the end of the year.
Okay, it is already being formed?
Yes, players have known about it for some time.
Are you happy to, you've been
I
patient?
don't look like a generally happy
No.
guy.
Well, you've been patient through the process since you're here, since you're head of the NHLPA. Now it's really close to bargaining sessions. Are you happy that you took all the time needed?
Well, first of all, bargaining is a process which requires and demands patience. You sort of have to have that. And you've got professionals on both sides, so hopefully everybody will have that. That's the first thing. Secondly, when you come into a situation like this, especially given the history that this particular union has had the last several years, you want to make sure you've done everything you can to bring the players up to speed, to involve them, to make sure you understand what they want and what they think is important. And so that's what you do. I don't know how to answer it beyond that. That's part of what's required to be done.
Well, do you think the 57% will that be one of the
I think you better call somebody on 6th Avenue in New York. I don't know the answer to that.
Don, when we spoke the other day, you mentioned that part of what you want to do is explain where you came from with the last lockout with the players. Why do you think that's important?
If I understand your question correctly, it's essentially this. You had an agreement that was made after a season was lost with very substantial reductions in player compensation. And when you do that, and you go to negotiate another one, people need to understand what's happened there. The second thing is that a very large percentage of the membership wasn't here during the last negotiation. And so they need to, you need to make certain that they understand what the history is too. Someone who comes into the league, they come into the league that year, but it doesn't mean there wasn't a league there the year before. Maybe one more, and I gotta go to work.
I mean, do you see the parameters like changing? I mean, would you ever imagine having a situation where there wasn't a salary cap in place?
Oh, I imagined worlds with no salary cap for all my professional career. That's not a big deal, but I'm not gonna comment on this negotiation. We'll have to see what happens. But I want to caution you about something. People get involved in buzzwords. And it's true in a circumstance like this in which you have a lot of public interest in the nature of the bargain. Although sometimes I wonder if the interest in is there going to be a result as distinct from what that result is or how the people got there. But when you're bargaining it, you look at the circumstances, you look at the situation, and when I say, as I have all my professional career, that you treat the strike as a last resort, that means you bargain in good faith, you try and accommodate the other side where you can and where it is consistent with the interests of your clients to do so. And You make proposals on your own, which represents what your constituents want to do and what they think is appropriate. And you end up with, hopefully, an agreement. And if you can't reach an agreement, and the alternative is continuing to work under terms which are worse in many cases than continuing to play, that's when you consider a shutdown. The problem that we've had in the salary cap sports going back 20 plus years now is that in many cases, and historically, I'm not saying it'll be true this time, but historically, a lockout has been the negotiating strategy of choice. You know, it's just a little unfortunate because you can get self-fulfilling prophecies in this business. Hopefully, that's not going to be true this time, and I'm going to do whatever we can do on the players' side, consistent with their interests, to make sure the deal's done.
What's your relationship with Gary at this stage?
Well, I've known Gary a long time. It's a professional relationship.
The GMs have made it clear that certain things they can't say as it pertains to the CBA without the fear of being punished. If we are players, we are operating under similar.
Who's going to punish them?
The league.
And why would they do that?
I don't have the answer to that. It's several side of the draft. I can't comment because there's a fine.
Well, I would ask why they would do that, and then the second question that I would ask is, what is it they're afraid you will say? From my standpoint, I've never believed in gag rules. I think they're inconsistent with fundamental notions of free speech. And if somebody wants to say something, there are 1,000 ways to do it anonymously anyway. So it won't be my recommendation that we get into that. Doesn't mean you don't suggest to people that in terms of bargaining, there are some approaches that may be more beneficial than others. But we don't have anybody standing with a hammer over somebody's head ready to clock them.
Okay.
I gotta go.
You said that there
I
have
don't
been.
have to go?
You had done negotiations before where there hadn't been something in place or had it expired in ongoing negotiations. Do you remember how the last time was for you that would have happened?
Sure. The strike ended in baseball about April 1st, 1995, when the owners were found to have bargained in bad faith, violated the labor laws, and we did not get a CBA agreed upon until December of '96. We played 2 full seasons without one.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay.